All right, everyone, welcome to the Running on a Small Budget Benefits of Tiny Epic N Programs, featuring Daniel Fernandez. My name is Marshall Curry. I'm the program manager at Epic N, and we're hosting our first webinar event of the 2020 webinar series. I really appreciate you all joining us today. I want to take a moment and introduce the Epic Network as we're the ones hosting the event, and a lot of you are newcomers, so I want to spend a little bit of time on this. The Educational Partnerships for Innovation in Communities Network, or EPIC Network, or EPIC N for short, is the nonprofit association of higher education institutions that adopt the award-winning EPIC model to facilitate high-impact and large-scale university, local government, community partnerships. EPIC N supports university programs across the globe that connect their local city, county, or community groups with the human capital of their university to improve the quality of life for all involved. These webinars, as I mentioned, were created to take the place of the EPIC Network Conference that was to happen at Indiana University Bloomington. And due to COVID-19, we've gone to an online version, and we're recording this for all to view. Anyone can attend the live tapings of all of our webinar events for this series and review the recordings that'll be posted on the website affiliated with the webinar series events. I really want to encourage every one of you who's attending today to go ahead and take a look at that schedule after the call and RSVP for other events, as we're going to be covering a wide range of topics about how universities and local governments can partner to face the needs, and even more so as we face COVID. This presentation and our conference was supported by our member programs, the Ford Foundation, and the William Flora Hewlett Foundation. Again, here's a little bit more about the EPIC model before we get into our featured speaker. One of our first events in the webinar series that was kind of a passive event on the event schedule is just to have you all watch a video about the EPIC model and also take a look at our keynote that was scheduled, watch her TED Talk. But the EPIC model is really key here for understanding what Dan, our featured presenter, is about to talk about. So I want to call this out as, like, if you have some questions about how all this works, I'd like to redirect you to that content, as well as these links here that I've pasted in the webinar for you all to look at. This PDF link will tell you stories about what happens when our programs are in action in a partnership. And also there's a list of terms we're probably going to use today. I've created a little quick glossary for those of you to take a look at. I'll post those as links in the chat box here after Dan gets started. It's key to remember is that the EPIC model takes into account 5 things, and the EPIC model is what Dan's program is employing when he's partnering with a local government. He respects existing administrative structures, meaning he's working within the government's work plans and also using existing courses on campuses. He's creating a genuine partnership. His partner, actually, the city partner that he's working with, is actually here today. They develop a really meaningful relationship, and they take time before the partnership begins to really map out what it's going to look like. They intentionally aim at improving quality of life in their projects, and they're community driven and evaluated on how they support. And usually that takes shape in scoping and in presentations at the end of the partnership. And finally, they're multidisciplinary and large N, or they have a lot of students, a lot of courses, and a lot of hours. Dan is presenting on one of our smaller program as a leader of one of our smaller programs. He'll paint a picture of how small they can get. And some of our presenters in other webinars coming up in the series will talk about some of the bigger programs and how they're able to reach those large numbers. I'm going to introduce Dan's program a little bit so you can see how it varies compared to other programs that are going to present later in the webinar series. You can see his stats here. Their average projects per year is still, and you'll see how it varies against other projects as the webinar series go on. And this will come up a little bit later. His annual budget makeup is meaning that he's getting 100% of his funds to run this program from his community partners. And let me introduce our speaker, finally. Let's get to Daniel Fernandez. He received all of his degrees in electrical engineering with his BSE from Purdue University and his MSEE from Stanford in 1980, and his PhD was also from Stanford. Look at that. He's been a professor at CSU-Monterey for 24 years, and he served 3 of them as chair of the academic senate and had other leadership roles. He teaches physics in classes in sustainability and a bunch of other subjects, And he coordinates the environmental studies program and developed and currently manages the Sustainable City Year program, which is why we're here today to hear about that program. And he partners with regional and local governing bodies with relevant class projects. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Dan to take over and tell you about his program and how it uses a smaller budget than some of our other programs to do some amazing work in communities. Again, as he's going through his presentation, feel free to raise your hand or insert your questions into the chat box so I can keep a running tally of them for Dan to answer after his presentation. Thanks all for joining, and Dan, take it away.
Thank you, Marshall. So as Marshall mentioned, this is the title of my presentation. It's about our Sustainable City Year program, and it's really about how we're running it on a relatively low budget. And that's what we mean by tiny is the amount of budget it takes to run the program can be small, which is an important consideration when starting new programs. And Marshall gave me a great introduction, but there's my picture. Of course, you can see me as well. But I've been teaching at CSU-MB longer than most of my students have been on the earth, which is kind of fun. So I've been here a long time. I was originally hired to teach physics, which I still teach, along with classes in environmental studies. And within environmental studies, those are the classes that I actually, in addition to coordinating the program, I incorporate the model into several of my classes. One of them is a capstone class for environmental studies students where they're doing their final project with a city partner. And that class was actually designed both to be a capstone class and to work with my Sustainable City Year program. And that's been very successful. I've been running that for 4 years now. I also teach classes in systems thinking, which is relevant to almost any topic, and also infrastructure, which is another class where I can incorporate partnerships with local city government. My background is, my current research topic is not exactly related to cities. It's actually on fog. And what you see in the picture behind me is fog collectors in central Chile. They're actually collecting fog water to make beer at this certain location. It's kind of fun. Really good beer too, I'll attest. I've always had a passion for sustainability, and this program has helped me to help realize that within the educational setting. And as Marshall mentioned, I started the EPIC program at CSU-MB in 2015. I also want to give you a little bit of information about our campus. It was founded in 1994. We had our first students in 1995. So I started when the campus had already been running for a year. So I'm not quite founding faculty, but I was around pretty early on. This is a picture of, on the right there, of President Clinton, who came to the inauguration of the campus, which was a really big deal. Folks from all around came there, and in that picture you'll see Leon Panetta, you'll see our first president of the campus there, you'll see Sam Farr, you'll see other dignitaries who were present for that event. And this marked a tremendous occasion. It was the conversion of a military base into a campus. And so that received a lot of significant attention from the President of the United States. We're located right here right in the southern portion of Monterey Bay. Whoops. And we're surrounded by quite a few small municipalities or cities, which has been really fortunate for me as this program has developed. One really key feature of CSU-MB that I want to share with you that'll put my program's size in context is that we have a fantastic service learning program that is one of the cornerstones of our campus. All of our students take service learning both at the lower division and at the upper division level. And our campus is the only one that was awarded the White House President's Award for Community Service twice. It's a great way that our students connect with the communities, and it's really emphasizes the role social justice plays in education and really getting to know the local communities and understand them. And that education isn't just from the university to the communities, but it actually goes both ways. And so that is a cornerstone of our campus. And service learning is actually, here's some more information on service learning that you can just read about. But it is, the director of service learning was the person who advised me to consider looking at the Sustainable City Year program, which is now called EPIC, which is what you're all listening to, the national organization. They had a conference back in 2014, and the director of service learning said, "Hey, Dan, I think this is a great thing. Why don't you check it out?" So I went up, and I actually took a student with me. The student is there on my left. I'm the short one in the middle, if you couldn't figure that out. The student's on my left, and on the right is a director of EPA who was also at the conference back in Oregon in 2014. And the student is an environmental studies student, and during the conference, he and I kind of looked at each other and said, "We have to do this. This just makes so much sense." And the idea of partnering with city governments and helping them with sustainability, and at the same time helping our students learn about city government and sustainability and how it can be implemented, it was almost a no-brainer. It just made so much sense that we decided we had to do it. So he turned it into a capstone project that he needed to graduate from the environmental studies program, and he presented that capstone a year later. And there it is. There's him presenting his capstone. And I started the program the fall of 2015 after having his help to try to coordinate what would be our first partner city. And as I'll tell you a little bit of history of us, but one of the things I noticed is that in attending the first conferences is if there was an award for the least amount of funding received from any program, I don't know if I'd get it, but I'd be a contender for it. So, and I take that actually with a little bit of pride. It's like, well, we can actually run the program with low funding. Not that I recommend it. If you can get a lot of funding, that's great. But if you can't, you can actually make a successful program with less amounts of funding if you have the right ingredients, and you can make it work. And that's really why I'm presenting right now. I want to talk about the successes of our program, the challenges of it as well, and that other universities who are considering this could do it. It's possible to do it without having a lot of funding, and perhaps you'll grow into having a lot of funding. At CSU-MB, I suspect that because we have service learning and it's such a cornerstone program on our campus, we're already doing a lot in the communities, and we have an institute, a very well-funded institute that's set up to do that. So I don't suspect that on our campus, the SCYP model that I've started will gain the same level of funding that it would on other campuses. And that's fine. I can work with that. I'm proud of our service learning program. I work with them closely, but they're going to be the flagship program on our campus for community involvement. And my program offers different opportunities than service learning, but it can still happen as well, but I don't expect it to get as big as many other campuses. Here are typical budgets for our program. The first year I actually had $50,000, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it's the most I've had in any year. The problem was because it was the first year, I didn't get as many faculty involved as I would have liked, so I couldn't even spend all the $50,000 that I had. And then I was never getting that amount of money again. The second year, I actually got $30,000 from the city, and that was the only year I actually was able to get an internal award from the university. I had $15,000. It was from an internal grant, and it was a student who had actually participated in some of my classes who thought this is a great thing, and she helped to encourage me getting that grant, but I never got it again. So I had that $45,000 that year, and that was the year I had the most classes. And the first 2 years were with the city of Salinas, and the Salinas is the county seat for the county of Monterey. And how I arranged that was interesting. I happened to, and this is a great lesson for others of you who are considering starting programs, you have to have a relationship with a local city to do it. There's just no question. You have to somehow meet or know somebody, get them excited about it, and then have them be your cheerleader at the local jurisdiction. And I happened to meet the director of public works at some event. I think it's actually an event, I can't even remember which one it was exactly. But I encouraged him to attend one of our events where I had a speaker present, Fritjof Capra, who I'll mention in a few minutes. I have a picture of that. And he was a systems thinker, and we thought alike, and I told him about our program, and he, as the director of public works, he was able to help make it happen. And so each program I've partnered with has had a champion within the city, and that's a really important ingredient that you have to have. After 2 years with the city of Salinas, I then partnered with the city of Seaside, and I believe we may have a couple of folks from the city of Seaside listening with us today, right now. And we had a great partnership with them. We're able to get a lot of exciting work done with the city. And each year the city had a certain amount of money that they were able to dedicate to the program, $21,000. So that was the budget I had for 2 years. And I'm currently working with 2 cities, one of which also has a representative here, City of Pacific Grove and the City of San Juan Bautista. I'm doing 2 cities because it helped us round out the budget. And with 2 cities, I was able to get, with city partners, you have to make sure you have enough staff. And just 1 city wouldn't have been enough because they're both small cities. And so it's working out. And it's the City of San Juan Bautista and Pacific Grove, as I just mentioned. And we're currently at a budget of about $25,000 this year, but this year is very strange because of COVID. So everything's a little bit up in the air, but I'll talk about that too. This is a typical budget that I had for 1 year for the city of Seaside, and the amount of money and what went where. I won't go into every detail of this. You can get an idea about it. I like to provide instructors that teach classes that partner with the partner city, some sort of stipend or some sort of payment for the efforts that it takes to coordinate a class that has a project in it with the city partner. And to me, that's an essential part of this model. Not all campuses do that, or not all campuses are able to do that. I am able to do that at CSU-MB, and I do that. The university has to take some overhead, which I think is worthwhile and important because the university is arranging the contract with the city partner at CSU-MB. That's something that our sponsored projects office does. And that's been of enormous assistance because I don't speak legalese very well. I also have some funding for student assistance in case I want somebody to help write up reports. For ethical and other reasons, I don't hire student assistants when they're in the class. I wait till the class is done. That could seem like favoritism or something like that. That's something to keep in mind if you're considering doing a model like this. So I wait until the class is over, and at some point then I contact some of the students who I think were engaged and good writers and ask them if they'd be interested in being paid to complete a report. There's some money for travel, which of course this year is much less needed. Mostly in my case for going to the yearly conference, and I would have been presenting something like this at the yearly conference. And then there's a little bit of money left over for the coordinator stipend, which is for the extra time I put in to coordinate everything. It doesn't cover all the time I put in, but a lot of this I do because I think it's important. Whoops, I'm going backwards. Sorry about that. All right, I want to say a few things about having a smaller program. And when I say smaller, there are programs that have budgets of $250,000, $300,000, and they're doing amazing things in their communities. And they have certain things and can do more things than I can do, and I'll be honest and upfront about that. I'm not able to do the marketing and social media in any way close to what a larger program, University of Oregon or University of Minnesota or Indiana University could do. They have some great resources for that, and it really helps them reach out more into the communities than I'm able to do. I don't have in-house clerical support. Occasionally I might have a student work on a report that I want to submit to the city, but I do all what's needed to do in order to keep the program running. I don't have staff to bounce ideas off of, although I do talk to Marshall quite a bit when I have questions, or others in other networks, or I should say others in other universities throughout the network across the country, or even internationally. If I have questions about something, I can pose it to them and they can give me suggestions and ideas. I don't have staff to interact with the partner cities. I have to do the initial interaction. Although once I do get faculty on board, I tie them to the city and they really are able to do most of the work they need to do on their own, which has been a real plus for me. So I really like to choose my faculty carefully as being people who I've maybe worked with before, who I know will make a good relationship with the city partner. I don't have staff to interact with university faculty. And I know on some campuses where you have really large spread out campuses, that's critical. You need staff members who can really infiltrate into faculty across many departments. What's good is I've been on campus for 24 years. I know many of the faculty here. I don't know all of them, particularly the newer ones, but I get to know a lot of them. And I am able to make personal connections, or I have personal connections, and I contact them and say, hey, would you be interested in working with the city on this certain project? I don't have an end of year celebration. I think that's a great thing to do. I was not able to pull it off with the budget we have and the time I'm able to put into it. I do attend final presentations of different classes. I participate as much as I can. I invite city partners to my students' events. My students do a capstone presentation, which is kind of like an end of year celebration. So I make it work, but I use existing structures to do that. As Marshall mentioned earlier, I'm using existing university structures to do as best I can with what I have. And I don't have the same strict project guidelines or requirements as many other cities. And that might result in expectations being different on my campus than on other campuses for final products. And I accept that. And I work with a city partner to make it something as worthwhile and beneficial to them as possible. There are also advantages to being a small program. It's quick to start up. It actually took me a year from the time I first found out about this to actually having a program running, a year and a half, let's say. It is possible to do it sooner. If you're a faculty member, particularly, and you're teaching your own class, you could do your own class for a couple semesters, and you could effectively be part of the program. And then if you have a colleague or two, you could have them join in, and then you have a small program. Decision making is a lot easier. I don't have to consult with the board or all that, although it doesn't mean it's better. I think it's good to have a board and good to have people to help make decisions. But when something has to be made, I just make it. The budget is manageable. It doesn't take me a lot of time to do it, which is good because I don't have a lot of time to work on the budget. The program can be nimble. If there's a change that needs to be made, I can make a change on pretty quick, pretty fast turnaround. Talking to the city partner, they may say, hey, we want to do this. And I may know who the faculty members, I contact them and bingo, they're on. It's a potential that other campuses can have. I gave a similar presentation a couple years ago and I had campus partners come up to me and say, thank you for doing this. I'm relieved because our community partners do not have a lot of money to arrange partnerships. Our university right now doesn't have a lot of money. It's good to know it can be done. And I'm here to tell you it can be done. As I mentioned, the expectations are modest, but they're not excessive for the budget we have. And the city partners, I would say, always get more out of it than they put into it. And they put a lot into it, so they get a lot, even more out of it. When I say they put a lot into it, I don't mean funding. They put time, effort, as well as some funding too. And a project of this size can be resilient. If the money does dry up, I don't like to let staff go when there's funding. And so that is a concern of mine. I want to be able to hire staff if I have money, but when the budget climate changes, if I get less money, I'm the only staff member really, or maybe a few less faculty will incorporate this into their curriculum. I can be resilient with that and the program can still go on. I'm going to just quickly go through a few slides. I'm not going to explain them. In a couple weeks when I present again, I'll provide more explanations on current projects. That's going to be the topic then, but you'll get some ideas of what's going on some of these slides that represent some of our past partnerships where students are maybe going to city council meetings and presenting, which is what you see here, the city of Seaside. Presenting posters at capstone festivals, and oral presentations as well. So it's kind of a celebratory theme where city partners are actually coming in and working with my students and they're engaged by it. My students are engaged by it and they get to hear somebody besides me talking about what the city's need. Some of the projects the students are engaged with that can go all sorts of different directions, whether it's a linear park or redesign of a street with guidance from the city, or even talking about urban fruit harvest in a city and finding where all the fruit trees are in a given city and mapping them. Helping with composting programs to be established in different cities, creating plant guides for cities, helping with new developments that are in the process of forming adjacent to our campus, and doing all sorts of things, whether it's creating charrettes, telling the city where things should be housed based upon their knowledge of the community. And my program has received, despite it being small, we've gotten significant media attention. On the left there, looks like a witch who's interviewing one of my students. She's actually a reporter. She happened to be interviewing my student on Halloween. My student set up a charrette, and the media came because they wanted to hear about the project the city was doing, and my students happened to be there. So I told my student, hey, you ready to give an interview? And she wasn't, but she did it anyway, and she did a great job. On the below center there, we received a Best Practice Award at the California Higher Education Sustainability Conference for the program, which was really exciting. Upper right, we have students who are, they got into our alumni magazine for a project done with one of my colleagues on helping make a street more walkable in the city of Seaside. Lower right is an award students got in a business class for a design they had that won an award in an agricultural tech summit. And the upper left, a staff member of the city of Seaside was so excited by the work we did, she sent a very laudatory note, which I've shared at conferences, and some people actually recognized her and had been a student with her 20 years ago at a conference, which was really exciting. So there's a lot of connections that are formed and a lot of opportunity in this kind of program. I'm just going to give you a few takeaways, and then I'll turn it back to Marshall, and we can have Q&A, and I'll participate in that as well. These are takeaways not about a small program, but about the EPIC N model in general. And one of them is that even without a lot of training in the areas that are of interest to the cities, students can make a huge impact. We don't have a design program or an architecture program at CSU-MB. So in many cases, everything they learn relevant to the city, they learn in a given class. But they're creative, they're enthusiastic, and it's great having them work with the city. Students one thing they can do is they can take the pulse of the public. They can do things like surveys and talk to members of the public in a way that the city probably doesn't have the person power to do. Students can also organize events, and when they're enthusiastic, it makes for very dynamic events. And I've had students obtain many job and internships as a result of their participation in this program. There's many I can count, and there's also probably many others I'm not even aware of, although we're trying to track that. So with that, Marshall, you can keep going, and I'm here, and I'll let you lead the show from now.
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. We wanted to wrap up before we get to the Q&A, which is some advice from Dan's presentation. And one thing that I took away from hearing Dan and preparing this presentation with him is that he spent time knowing the resources that already exist on his campus, and he used the EPIC model to help match what he needed to provide for the local governments with the resources and items on campus, like he mentioned with the Community Service Learning Office and the Sponsored Projects Office. There's other things that other EPIC programs have done to make those connections, but what I wanted to highlight as advice is like use the EPIC model to be your entry into that conversation. You've probably thought about some of these synergies before if you're already doing partnership work on your campus or in your community, and the EPIC model becomes a really nice conversation topic to say, there's this cool model out there. How could we use it to align some of the things we're doing already to better serve our local governments and communities? And I think Dan's program highlights it and how you can do it in a small way. Dan, I think you had another point on that one.
Yeah, one of the tools I wanted to mention is that there are tools that EPIC N provides as well that have been invaluable to me. My current city partner, the City of Pacific Grove, is Caleb Schneider is one of the participants listening to this presentation, and he wanted to see what all the projects I had done were. And being just a one-person show, it was hard for me to pull all that together in a nice format. But I worked with Marshall, and EPIC N is coming up with tools that allowed me to enter the information. It was still a big job, but it was far less than it would have been if I had to do it on my own. I entered all the information, which is something I should be doing anyway, on all the programs and all the projects we did. And Marshall was able to create a very helpful spreadsheet from which we could create lists and abstracts of all the projects, pretty much with a couple snaps of a finger once all the information was in. Marshall's also participating with me in a class I'm currently teaching, where I'm doing the SCYP model for that class this semester. And now it's, of course, on Zoom. And he was able to jump in. He helped create a spreadsheet for that class that my students are entering information for related to cities that we're able to do remotely. So this program can be run in remote mode right now. And I was very fortunate that we came up with a project that involves remote, the students don't have to be on site to do it, which is not possible at this point.
And I think we just have one other final thing, and I hear this time and time again from programs all across the world that join our network. And this is a big mantra of the network, is just start. For those of you who are newcomers to the program, or for those of you who already run a program but are trying to think of something new or trying to do something new with your program, just start is something Dan mentioned earlier in the presentation, and I want to echo that. We're here to help. The people in the network are here to help. Just start and see what happens, and I'm sure some good things will come of it. Dan, go ahead.
I have a funny thing to say about that. Mark Schlossberg, I think, might have come up with this mantra, just start. I confused it with the just do it from Nike. So I get confused with that, but I can't use that because Nike would probably not like that. But it's the same kind of idea. Get out, make it happen. You can do it. I would say if you're a faculty member, because you're already teaching a class, if you see a way your class can do this, you can be the seed that starts it on your campus. And if you're the only one who does it, that's okay, because that's one more class that has this model than you would have otherwise had. But when you're doing it, if it works for you, you might be able to get some of your colleagues to participate, and you can start growing.
And we had a comment about this, like, I'm concerned about just starting a program because COVID-19 is just taking all the other university priorities away. And we heard that, and I just attended a presentation for local governments, actually, about just looking at local businesses and how you can help local businesses. What are the things local governments are being asked to do? And this is the list that was presented to them within 4 categories, right? And each one of these things is something an EPIC program or a project in one of your classes could help with in a really meaningful way. And we already have some examples of EPIC projects that have helped with lots of these things. For example, Dan had pictures of a tactical urbanism project where you're redesigning a street to do something different. So the wave on street parking stuff and the create carry out zones, that's something we can easily do, or EPIC programs have easily done. And right now really feels like a really good time to start talking about how do you run an EPIC program on your campus, because it will allow you to unlock the resources in your universities that are to some degree sitting dormant because the research labs aren't open, because you can't have people on campus, your student groups can't meet. And this could be a really cool torch to bring that program or those resources to bear into your local community to do the things listed below in this table.
And yeah, Marshall, maybe I can just say too,
yeah.
I think COVID-19 is a time when campuses are going to need to step up to the plate more in terms of how they work with their local communities. There have been a lot of questions in the past of, what role is the university playing? Now is the time. This is the opportunity where we can really work with our communities when they need it and when they need the expertise that universities can offer and should offer.
So again, I provided resources in the chat, and also they'll be in the slides here for future reference for the different EPIC resources that I think are helpful to go along with the content that Dan provided for us. The other thing I wanted to bring up is just let's continue the discussion. I'm pasting in the chat a link to a feedback form for this presentation. Please fill that out to give us some feedback. And also, feel free to post about the event on social media and share or give prop to Dan for all the content he just provided for us. And if you go to the webinar schedule page, you'll see this recording up in the next couple days. And with that, you can also go to our website. It's here at this. But with that, I'm going to move us into the Q&A session of this. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm really excited for your questions. And I'm going to go ahead and start prompting Dan with questions that you've asked. But at any time, if you really want to do a follow-up question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. There's a lot of us on the call, so I will kind of step in to keep us moving on to different questions. But to start it off, Dan, how about you take these 3 kind of quicker questions about in the program management, how are you dealing with these things? I feel like these are kind of quicker questions around program management.
So the first question is, how does my program promote itself to potential partners? That's an excellent question. I was really fortunate to get our first partner, the city of Salinas. But when the idea and the model is to move on to another city every couple of years. Originally, it was going to be every year, but I find for me, that's just too much, because every time you change, you have to figure out how that city works so that you can even get a contract signed and all that. So I actually kind of like the 2-year model. That works better. But you got to get the word out. The city of Seaside, which we had another 2-year partnership for, I got really fortunate. The city manager happened to call me and say, I heard about your program, I want in. And how did he hear about the program? I'm not sure, but I have a guess. And I think it was during the first year or two of the program, I thought, it was highly recommended that I hold sort of a 1-day mini conference where I invite established EPIC partners to my campus, which they need to be compensated for that, in order to get my program rolling. And I thought, no, I don't need that. I know the cities. I'll find city partners. I can advertise it to the campus. And I did that for a year and a half or so. And I realized I need a little more. I need somebody to kind of give my program a little shot in the arm to get it more visible. And so I had somebody from the EPA come, the EPA environmental manager from Region 9, Laura Block, came, and Jessica Barlow, who's running a really successful EPIC-N program from San Diego State. She came up, and they and I did a presentation, and our president came, and we had members of the community there, and it made a big difference, even though I thought I had it covered. They really helped that. And from that, we had representatives from the city of Seaside there, and I suspect that they approached the city manager and said, this program's a good thing. So it was another way to get the tendrils out. One of my partners now, City of Pacific Grove, Caleb, you're on the line. I happened to see him at REI once. And I said, hey, he was in my class. He was a student of mine 10 years ago in physics. And I said, hey, Caleb, what are you up to? And he said, oh, I'm working for the City of Pacific Grove. And my jaw dropped. I said, oh my gosh, do you know about our program? And that's partly how I got the partnership with the City of Pacific Grove. When is the cost structure and multi-project expectations presented to the potential partner? That's kind of in a negotiation phase. We talk about, and it's a back and forth a little bit. I talk about, hey, about how much do you think your city is able to contribute, and not only how much money, but how much staff time, because it takes some staff time. It's not like an internship, fortunately, because in an internship, you might have 1 or 2 students working with a staff member, and that's a lot. Here, the staff member is working with a faculty member and maybe occasionally talking to students, but you're leveraging so much more for the staff member's time, but you still need the staff member's time in order to participate in the program. And so those discussions happen early on before a contract sign. And then once the contracts, you work it out through the contract. You say, okay, for this amount of money, this much is going to be for this much is going to be for that. So it's an ongoing back and forth iterative process. Could I tell you more about internal funding that I received? It was funding from student fees, basically. I was able to argue that this was going to be of benefit to many students throughout the campus. And so the student fee committee was able to give it some money that year. So it was through an internal grant that they're made available through the campus. Your campus may have more opportunities even than ours does. We only have 7,500 students or so on our campus, but we still see internal grants that come through. And so sometimes there are internal grants that you can apply for that might be, $10,000 or $15,000 that can be enough to get you started on something. How much of my time is spent on the program? That's a good question because all my time in some ways gets mashed together. In some ways, boy, if I had to say maybe 10 hours a week, but I like to use my time, maybe multitasking is the wrong word, but if I can do one thing and accomplish several different things with my time, that's time very well spent. And when I'm teaching a class that has the EPIC-N model, then I could argue, well, is my time that I'm doing for the class spent teaching my class, or is it spent on the EPIC-N model? And the answer is that it's spent on both. And so I'm able to leverage my time more effectively that way. So I'm not just being a manager, which could take a lot of time. I'm being a manager and an instructor. I had to be an instructor anyway. So it's sometimes difficult to track the direct hours spent on a given project because some of my time may be spent on multiple things simultaneously.
And this is where I'll interject to give a view of the Epic network. Dan, thank
Yeah.
you for spelling out how it looks for you. Because again, Dan is running one of our smaller programs in the network. He's wearing many of the hats that are usually worn by different people in other programs. Usually our programs will have a 0.5 to a 1.0 program manager who does not have any teaching responsibility. And then they'll have either a faculty director who's kind of overseeing the program as like a executive director or kind of a board of directors kind of task or budgetary decision-making task. Some other network programs have a big body to do that. Others have just one person. And then they all engage faculty. And Dan's kind of wearing all three hats at the same time. And so that's where his answer is fitting, and also how he differs from some of our programs.
You went mute.
Yeah, I'm going to move on to the next slide there, so that we can get into the next question. We had a lot of questions around this. It's like, this is our first time hearing about this program, the EPIC model, and how it works. I want to start how. I'm hoping a lot of Dan's content will talk, that he shared already talks to that, but Dan, could you just really succinctly say, like, if someone's looking to start a program, what would be your first, 1 or 2 steps you'd have them take? And then I'll answer. I've got a couple EPIC steps we suggest.
Great. Yeah, well, for the person asking the question, I'd ask, are you a faculty member or are you a staff or administrator? If you're on a campus. If you're a city partner, that's a whole nother thing. I'm not a city person myself, but you'd want to find a campus in that case. But if you're on a campus already, if you're a faculty member, can you see a way that one of your classes might serve a city partner? That would be my suggestion. And then don't be afraid to reach out to city partners. Start making contacts, start making calls. Are there any venues where you interact with city partners? Would you attend city council meetings? Can you meet some of the folks who are influential in a given city and plant seeds? A lot of it's about planting seeds, and then some of them are going to come to fruition, and then capitalize upon that and see how you can work with the city to both mutually help the city and support your class.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate that. We, from EPIC standpoint, we suggest the same thing. If you don't have a local government partner already figured out, a champion to try things out with, find one. And in COVID reality, I think Dan's suggestions still work in that you can go and attend a public city council meeting that's virtual, right? And you can find those contacts in other ways. And you also can find what they're looking for, because there's so much more public communication out and about in the virtual landscape. It's easier to kind of find local government needs, especially looking at short-term needs. The other thing we would suggest from the EPIC side of things is find that faculty champion. If you're not a faculty yourself, and maybe you are a faculty, but you don't have the bandwidth, or your class isn't really associated with something that you think local governments will need, find a faculty champion who does and who's willing to do this kind of a project. The final thing I'll say is get in touch with us, because we have many people like Dan throughout the network, and they've got a lot of advice. And depending on your individual situation, I can help you figure out what is the thing you're looking for and what resource do you need to get catalyzed on your campus, and I'll connect you to those resources or those people to help you do that. It looks like Caleb wants to jump in here, so I'm going to let him do that. Caleb is Dan's community partner currently, and so I'm going to let him jump in because he probably has some good advice for people as well.
Yeah, just looking at some of those comments there. Again, I'm Caleb Schneider. I'm a management analyst with the City of Pacific Grove in the Public Works Department. And while it was quite serendipitous for Dan and I to run into one another at my evening job at the time, I think also getting together with your alumni association, because they do tend to keep track of who's graduated and what they're doing now, and you can tell by someone's email handle that they're working for a city now and that sort of thing. So reaching out through the alumni, I think would be a good way to start making some of those connections. And when I heard about this program as a city administrator, I realized, I was like, oh, here's an untapped resource. How do we make this happen? Just knowing that it's even a possibility that your university is willing to work with you is kind of mind-blowing. I think because I went to CSU-MB, which is literally, 10, 15-minute drive down the street from me, it is interesting how we leave the university and we go on to municipal jobs and we leave behind the university. And I took with me all the skill sets and the knowledge and the research skills, but I left that network behind. And now in hindsight, it seems silly. Why did I do that? I should have maintained that network to see how the university, which is, champions of students looking for projects. I was one of those students. I did my senior thesis with the Bureau of Land Management project because the professor networked with that individual. So I think really just not being afraid to reach out, if you're a city, to your university, and if you're a university, to your city, and just start those connections and see what you can pull together. Dan and I have been working together for the better part of a year on this, and there's still details we flush out as the project's developed with the students that are available and the coursework that's there. So just start the connection. Just get started. That's probably the best way to get this done, because you don't know what's possible until you start trying.
So with that, I'll open it up to anyone else who wants to unmute themselves. We got a lot of people here, so jump in quick if you got to jump at the hour. But I'll open up to questions.
I have a question.
Thanks, Kathy. Go for it.
So if you're working with students, you're limited often by in terms of a time span of like a semester or are they undergrads, grads, students, that sort of thing. So that creates really a challenge in terms of dealing with the municipal needs, which sometimes don't really fit with that. So any advice on that front?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start. Maybe Marshall can fill in. Yeah, cities and universities typically work on different timescales, and that's an ongoing challenge because usually the city takes longer to do a project than the 6 months or 4 months. We're on a semester system, so maybe the 4 months of a semester. So what ends up happening perhaps is students can do a portion of a project for a city. They may not see the whole thing to completion. They may just participate in one phase of it in some way that will be of benefit to the city. But there's no question that can be a challenge. What sometimes you can do is, if you teach multiple classes, sometimes a second semester class can be a continuation of something you did the first semester. Or if you're with a city partner for more than a year, you might be able to start a project one year and continue with it the next year, albeit it'll be with a different group of students, maybe a couple repeats, because some students might take the same, a different class with the same faculty member. But it does involve flexibility and creativity in different ways.
Yeah, and that's actually, I think, coming into the network and meeting all the people who do the same job that Dan does, that's actually been the thing I most respect from our program managers, and the things I've learned most from our program managers is that the people who come into the network and gain resource from the network and engage with the network learn the skill set and are able to negotiate with the local municipality and the university. How do we get these things to match? Because it's two different ginormous bureaucracies in some cases, and it takes a lot of expertise and brilliance to figure out how do we make these things work and how do we find synergies with these resources. And that's what the people like Dan that I get to talk to that are all in our network have started sharing resource with me so we can help everyone else do it. So we have some content in that now to help you in your journey in doing that. And actually next week on Tuesday, I'll plug one of the next webinars. On Tuesday next week, the afternoon session, we'll highlight how a bigger university is doing it with like some middle to bigger cities, And the one in the morning will highlight how we're doing that with rural communities, and really focusing on that individual topic. And that, because it's so complex, it does take it. I mean, it has a lot of different sessions we can do on it. But the other advice is, I agree with Dan on all points. It's like you break it down. You as a faculty member help the city break it down into bits, and then you show them how you can take those bits and start aligning them to multiple classes, so that way they actually step on top of each other and build a better deliverable than they might have received if they just did it one-off, which is another cool part of Epic again. Katie, you're muted, or Kathy, you're muted, sorry.
I got one little tip. I've been running a program for a few years with Hennepin County, and whenever they say to me, well, we have to have this done in the next 6 months, I say, yeah, I remember you told me that 2 years ago.
yeah. Thanks, Kathy.
Caleb, have you ever experienced that?
You know, I have experienced just that, where you know, those are the projects actually that I have been working with Dan on, or a couple of the projects. Is we kind of have these semester-long, big chunk projects, but then we also have these little bite-sized projects that is just verifying GIS data for, you know, some facet that you have. You know, go revisit all of the storm drain inlets. You know, I don't have a crew that is technologically savvy, but, you know, any student in these GIS classes can whip out their phone and complete some GIS data validation task fairly easily. So it's a mashup of larger projects that take all semester long, multiple semesters, might be multiple years, but then some that are much more bite-sized. And doing both, I think it helps take care of some of my workload. I would say there's, especially from the GIS side of things, I've accomplished more in one semester with the CSU-MB students than I could probably dream to accomplish in my entire career with the city, just because there's suddenly so many hands available for a specific task.
And as a former student who participated in the U of O program, knowing that my homework assignment doesn't just go on my refrigerator with a grade, knowing that it gets out and helps Caleb and helps keep track of storm drain pollution and stoppages and leaks is extremely gratifying. I mean, there's a lot of students on the call, so I hope you all get the same experience in Dan's class and working with Caleb, but I'm going to stop there and open it up to other questions. Anybody else?
Okay, I'm going to hug it with one more question then. One
it.
of the things that I hear all the time from our elected officials is demonstrate how this research and this work affects policy and practice. So I would ask EPIC and the whole organization, again, the more you can do, and it sounds like you're doing a lot of that already, but the more we can like figure out ways to quickly and easily communicate the way that elected officials do. They are not going to they're not going to read a long report, they're not going to read a long memo, and they want bullet points. And so the more support we can get on that front, I think the better we'll all be.
Yeah, Dan, I'm going to go ahead and take this one and then I'll shoot it to you, okay? That's something we realized totally, and we've actually been working on it for a whole year now, or approaching a full year, because again, they're so complex. They do so much between the university and the local government that there's a lot of data points to kind of understand and figure out how are we going to demonstrate these, what's actually meaningful, what's not, how do we do this without breaking the bank on our staff's time, meaning the program managers like Dan, and then how do we paint that into a picture visually and in a meaningful way. And so we have a lot of resources on it. We have a lot of tools that are still kind of in beta version, but we're ready to start sharing them with programs to try and help you on your journey to do that. And we just ask that you engage. And the one that Dan has used is that tracking sheet he mentioned earlier. So Dan, could you tell them a little bit more about what you were doing, what you were doing to keep track of projects before and the results, and then what you were able to do with this new tool?
Great question. Again, as a one-person shop, so maybe my time, 0.2 staff, something like that. What I would do is when students would complete a project, I would save it to a folder. When some of my faculty colleagues who were working with me would finish a semester where they were doing a project with a given city partner, I'd contact my colleague and say, please send me any work your students did please let me know if you're having a presentation so I can attend it at least if possible. And they don't always have presentations. It's not required.
Right.
So it's a matter of basically getting the projects, putting them in a folder that's based upon the year and the class, and that's how I would try to do it. And that's really all I had. So when Marshall had this tool, I was like, oh my gosh, this could be really helpful, because somebody like Caleb would come along and say, hey, Dan, can you tell me what your students have done? And it's like, I can, but I have to type everything out, and it would be nice if I could do it just once, and Marshall's tool will allow me to do that. Of course, you have to put time into it. It's about sorting information. But that's the before and after.
Yeah, and what happens is Dan takes raw data, like this project happened this year with this course and this community partner. They did this. He puts that information into this tool, and then we can spit it out to whatever audience, in whatever format we want. So it allows you as a program to kind of continually adapt what it looks like that's coming out for whatever audience you're projecting it to.
Can I suggest one last column to add to your spreadsheet?
Sure, I might have it, but go for it. It's a really long spreadsheet.
How about a very short quote from an elected official talking about how they value that project?
Yeah, we got the column. It's just working with programs and not breaking the bank on their time collecting them from the elected officials, because it's hard to get the elected officials to the table. But it's in there, and happy to keep that data. Caleb, get your quote ready. I mean, you're not elected, but you get what I'm saying.
Caleb's
Anyway.
quote would be great.
We have a column for non-elected officials too. But then from there, I'm going to stop the recording and thank you all for attending. Anyone who wants to remain on the call, if you have time, want to continue asking questions, feel free to do so. Thank you so much for joining us for the first webinar of the 2020 Epic End webinar series. There's going to be some exciting announcements coming out next week about some other things the Epic Network is doing to try and help local governments and universities address the COVID-19 response and recovery. So keep an eye on your emails, and also please RSVP for the other events you'd like to attend. Thank you. And again, I'll leave this up as I stop the recording.